Hi, everybody. Jeff Toyster here. I am joined today by Andrew Gilliam. He is the ITS Service Desk Consultant at Western Kentucky University. And Andrew is going to talk to us about how he was able to increase survey response rates from customers by 370%, nearly 4 times. So I'm excited to talk about that. Andrew, how are you today?
Doing very well, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
No, I appreciate you being here. So before we talk about how you did it, I want to set the stage really briefly. And one question I wanted to start with was, can you give us a kind of a general overview of who are your customers? Who are you surveying?
So we're surveying both internal and external customers. I work for an ITS service desk for a university, and our customers can be faculty and staff who are our employees, our internal customers who work for the university. We also have students who are external customers. They're currently with us. We also talk to a lot of prospective students, parents, and also alumni who have kept their email even after they attend. So we touch everyone along almost every point of their journey with the university.
So this is a broad spectrum of people that you're talking to. And I think most people understand the intent of surveying external customers. Why internal? In other words, why do you survey faculty or staff internally?
We want to survey our internal customers, number one, because how our employees interact with IT is a big part of the employee experience. And we want to have a good understanding of how we're contributing to that. And also because it's a very large organization with a lot of different organizational units and potentially silos there, we want to make sure that we're speaking directly to the people who are using our services to understand how we're contributing to them being successful in their jobs.
I like how you tie in the idea of employee experience and customer experience. I think people who are watching this, even if they're not in higher ed, they can relate to having internal and external customers. And there's people that we need to work with to get our jobs done. And that's part of what you're doing. So I wonder, well, I want to talk about the response rate, which I think is really impressive that you're able to get such a big increase in that. What was your response rate before you made some changes? I know you're going to talk about some changes in a moment. What was the response rate when you got started?
On average, it was 1 to 1.2% response rate. And we send out our surveys 24 hours after each contact with us, and we send those by email. And it was extremely low. 1.2% was very good for us back then.
So, a question that I often get asked by people is, what is a good response rate? And there's really no numerical target. A good response rate is enough responses to feel like you have a reliable sample of your audience and you get useful and actionable data. But I imagine even at 1.2%, you were a little unhappy with it. Did you have a target when you kind of set out trying to increase it?
There was no target in mind, but I realized that the way we were inviting customers to our survey, it wasn't appealing. And one of the main things that would happen, I would talk to friends who work in other areas of the university, and I would mention something about, you can take our survey after we close your ticket. And they would tell me, I never received this. I never received one. And I was like, no, I'm sure you did. But hearing from customers that they weren't even getting the survey or they didn't perceive that they were receiving the invitation, that was a red flag to me.
And so this was, I know you just said this, but just to recap, this was an email survey where the survey invitation went out via email and it was about 24 hours after a ticket was closed. So what they're telling you is they don't remember seeing your email, basically. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So how did you increase the response rate from 1.2? You told me that you increased it 370%, which is quite a bit. How did you get that? What were the changes that you made?
So our new response rates are anywhere from 6.5%. Recently, we just set a record with a 9.9% response rate. And the biggest change was how the email was worded. In our old survey invitation, the subject was all about the ticket being closed. The first paragraph was all about, we closed your ticket. And I think that's pretty common. A lot of survey invitations that go out as part of like a receipt or some other transactional notification, the survey is just kind of a footnote. And ours was really a footnote after the first paragraph, and prioritizing the message that we want to hear from you. We want you to tell us about your experience. That was really the key. And now when you receive this email at a glance from the subject, the headline, and then the first line of the first paragraph, you know what we want from you now.
So is that why people were missing the survey to begin with, that they were getting it and it just said your ticket's closed and they said, yeah, I know that, delete. They didn't even, is that why people were missing it?
I think so, especially for customers who weren't particularly engaged with us. They weren't particularly happy and knew to look out for the survey, and they weren't particularly angry because something went wrong. Everyone in the middle, they just thought it was a notification their ticket was closed. So why would they read any further?
So you bring up something interesting. I happened to catch your session at ICMI's Contact Center Expo, the 2019 version, in case you're watching this video in 2012, 2022 or something. But you talked about there's different types of customers who respond to your survey. One of them is the angry customer. Who are some of the other people that are a type of customer who's responding to your survey?
So there are the happy customers. Those are, of course, we love to have those. I say that those customers are motivated to take our survey by a debt of gratitude. We did something nice for them, we made their day, and they want to return the favor. Lots of customers who have good experiences want to tell the employee about it. They want to tell the employee's manager and leaders of that organization. And then we also have what I call the bored customers. And bored customers respond to surveys because we drew them in through an engaging email or link or invitation to that survey. They didn't have a really amazing experience that they're just dying to tell us about. They didn't have a really horrible experience. They were just somewhere in the middle, and they aren't engaged with us enough to scrutinize all the communications we're sending them. So they're not going to catch a survey that's a footnote.
Did you notice a change in the types of customers who responded to your surveys once you changed the invitation? In other words, I can imagine if I'm angry, maybe I'm more likely to look for that survey. And then if I'm bored or I'm happy, maybe I put less effort into that. Is that something that you noticed?
Absolutely. So in our old survey invitation, the bulk of responses, it really just functioned as a complaint catcher for us. The bulk of the responses were something unusually bad happened, something went wrong, maybe we closed the ticket prematurely, and we would get a lot of those. We had some, I would say, really engaged, loyal customers who were consistently happy, and they would take our surveys. But we didn't get a lot kind of in the middle. We didn't get a lot of neutral customers. And by improving the email invitation, we're now hearing from people who are in that middle ground. That's really important because those customers who are in the middle are the easiest to move up to the top.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, something that you said about that really strikes me is if I'm only hearing from angry people or maybe a few of the really happy people, I don't have a good enough basis to compare what are the angry people saying versus what are the happy people saying versus what are the neutral people saying.
Mm-hmm.
And going back to your sample rate, I imagine for some people who are watching this to say, well, I want a 20% rate, or I got a 20% rate right now. You know, I don't care about something that's, 6-7%. But what you're telling me is no, we're getting a sample of people now that we didn't have before. So the raw number doesn't matter. It's that we get the spectrum of
Exactly.
the happy people versus the unhappy people.
Exactly. It's that spectrum that's important. You don't want to hear just from one category of customer, whether they're particularly happy or particularly upset. You need to hear from the whole range to understand what's happening across the entire experience in reality.
So I want to come back to this email for a moment, because I imagine for some people, this almost feels like, well, that's too simple. You just change the email and then, you get so many more responses. And maybe we can get into a couple of the specifics. So one thing is, what was the subject line? Even if you don't remember word for word, but before and then after, what did the subject line of the email look like?
So the old subject line said ticket closed. The new subject line says, how did we do closing? And then the subject of the ticket, the category. And in the old survey, there was also a heading at the top of the email. It said ticket closed. The first line of the first paragraph of that sentence in the old one was, we closed your ticket. And then it continued to say, if you think this is an error, you can contact us here. The survey was at the bottom. The new survey invitation, the subject, how did we do? The headline, tell us about your experience. And the first line of that is, we'd like to hear from you. And then we also reiterate our call to action with the underlined hyperlink that says, tell us about your experience again.
So there's a couple of things that are really interesting here I want to unpack. One is, I when you were initially telling me about this, I wondered, well, wasn't the original email to tell people their ticket is closed? But it sounds like the subject still mentions your ticket is closed.
Yep.
Just how did we do closing your ticket? So this may sound obvious, but has there been any confusion about whether people's ticket is closed or not with the change in the email approach?
No, not really. The new email, it still communicates that same important closure message. We want to let people know that we've closed your ticket. And through our particular system, the survey email is the only way to make sure that someone receives an email every time their ticket's closed, 100%, no room for human error there. The new email still communicates that the ticket is closed. And what's great is our survey is also equipped for customers to tell us about a problem if their issue wasn't resolved. So even if the ticket was closed prematurely, we have built the survey so that it can handle that situation gracefully and in a way that serves the customer the best.
So the customer says, no, you shouldn't have closed my ticket. I still have more issues. Then you facilitate that process.
Exactly, yep.
So, but there's something else that you said, I think that's really interesting. It's not just the subject line. It wasn't even the first part of the message. It sounds like you repeat this call to action, hey, we want your feedback, in the same email in a few different ways, so that hopefully you're catching the customer's attention versus a single mention at the bottom of the email. Was that something that was intentional in terms of repeating the message over and over again?
Yes, I want it to be very clear when we're sending this message out at first glance, particularly for those customers who aren't engaged with us enough to read the entire email message. Most people don't read the entire email message, they skim. I want it to be really apparent right up front. This is what we want you to do for us.
Now, I wonder if anybody who's watching this is wondering, did you have to offer any incentives or prize drawings or anything to get people to complete these surveys?
We don't offer any incentives. That actually goes into the fourth type of customer that I talked about in the ICMI presentation, the opportunistic customer. And those customers take surveys just because of what's in it for them. And in a lot of cases, customers will rush through surveys just to get whatever reward is at the end of it. So you have to be extremely careful doing that. I would rather customers be taking our surveys because they're engaged with us with the service experience that they had, and then also by how we crafted that email message.
Did you, I wonder, how did you come up with some of these principles that you put in place? Was it a matter of testing a bunch of different ideas to see what works? Did you draw from specific principles to start with? How did you get to where you were in terms of that email invitation?
That's a good question. As far as knowing what was wrong with the invitation, with people not realizing it was there, I got that through a lot of feedback, just sort of unstructured feedback from customers that said, I never get these surveys, or I didn't notice the survey. And that was a pretty big problem because everyone's receiving these. So if you don't realize you're receiving that, that's going to be that's a big indicator that something's not working with our design there. And thankfully, the changes we implemented, they worked for us on the first try.
So you're doing something, Andrew, that I think a lot of customer service professionals need to do more of, which is you were talking to your audience. You weren't just relying on the audience on the
Yep.
survey. You were talking to people and gathering unstructured feedback. Is that something that's kind of a natural part of your role, or were you going out of your way to ask people to give input on the survey or other things?
The new survey was under development, and I was with the organization for at least 2 years before our new survey and invitation launched. So I was naturally exposed to some of that. But I definitely recommend if you don't already have some feedback from people who are taking your survey already, it may be good to get some reaction from how do you feel about this invitation email, or send out some samples to see, which one gets the most reaction.
Did you I'm wondering, did you have kind of like a few iterations, or was it a matter of kind of designing to kind of the ultimate end product and then launching it? You mentioned sending out samples, for example. Did you go through that process yourself, or did you find that you were able to kind of get the right invitation on the first try?
Because we had an invitation already, and I knew it wasn't working based on the feedback I was getting, it was as far from grabbing attention and asking customers to take the survey as possible. So in my proposal to management to change the wording of this, I really kind of asked for more than what maybe I needed to really drive that point home. We really want you to take the survey. We want to hear about your experience. And thankfully, it was all approved.
So you had to get this approved. Was there any part of the organization, or were there any leaders that were squeamish about changing the status quo?
There's always going to be leaders who are squeamish about change, about asking different questions, about doing things in a unique way. There are some things we do in our survey that were really new to us. We implemented NPS instead of having a CSAT style question. We changed how our follow-up questions work. So we no longer had a series of Likert scales. There's always going to be leaders who are nervous about that change. Thankfully, my manager and our director were very on board with that. I presented a case that they bought into. And for us, we were the group that actually used this data. We have always sort of been responsible for it. So I think it was a little bit of a ask forgiveness later principle from them, and also we're the ones who need to use this data to make sense. So really, what we're trying to get from it, unless another group said that we want a completely different type of data, or we want to go a different direction with something, I think they realize that we're the ones that have to analyze the data. We're the ones that benefit from the response rate, and then we share the product with you.
So, Andrew, you shared a lot about one specific topic today that I think is really useful. I know you've been speaking at some conferences lately. You're super active on Twitter, particularly the weekly ICMI chat, the CustServe chat. If people want to hear more from you, or just learn a little bit more about what you're doing to improve response rates, what's the easiest way for someone to contact you or learn a little bit more?
Yeah, I'd love to be a resource and hear what others are going through with their survey journey, and I love to offer help when I can. andytg.com, andytg.com is a good way to reach me. It has links to all of my social media profiles, and that @ndytg on Twitter as well.
All right. Well, Andrew, thanks again for your time today. I enjoyed talking about surveys with you, and I just appreciate you being here.
Thanks so much, Jeff. It's great to be here.